Hello, I'm Gemma from Write and Shine. I'm delighted to welcome you all today to our talk, Writing in Uncertainty. Write and Shine runs a programme of early morning writing events, taking inspiration from the first part of the day, from the rhythms of the seasons and the natural world as well. And each season we host a talk with a writer or an artist, offering space for people to listen and reflect on ways of living a creative life. For autumn, our programme at Write and Shine focuses on the power of words. So it felt very apt to invite along a brilliant author and founder of disability arts organisation called Outlandish Arts, Gaele Sobott. Gaele writes across literary genres, from children's literature to poetry, film, essays, short stories. She's always exploring new ways of capturing her experiences in words, always grappling with the right shape and form to express her ideas. And for Writing in Uncertainty, I'll be asking Gaele about writing, creativity, and uncertainty. Her work doesn't shy away from the big issues. She talks about social justice, the climate crisis, who gets to speak, whose voices are silenced. I'm really keen to talk to her about her approach to writing about these subjects, and also how she writes during and about the challenging times we're living through. I think for so many of us as writers, the news, living with change, living with the pandemic, it feels very hard to write, to channel feelings of anger, powerlessness, frustration into creative work. And also it feels hard to write of right now, write about these moments that we're living in. It can be really demanding on us as writers. So today, Gaele will talk about the role of uncertainty in her writing and how embracing discomfort is an inherent part of the creative process for her. The event today is presented in partnership with Speaking Volumes. We're celebrating this lovely new anthology, Not Quite Right for Us. Gaele is one of the 40 contributors to this lovely, brilliant, dynamic collection of new writing on experiences of outsiderness and defiance against it. It's highly recommended, available from all good bookshops. Gaele has kindly agreed today to read from the short story that's in the collection, which is great. The final thing I wanted to say is I've had the pleasure of knowing Gaele for a number of years, and one of the things I really love about her work is her clear-sightedness. Her focus is really extraordinary. She's able to see the world in such an interesting way and share her experience of it with such humanity, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming Gaele today. I'm going to ask Gaele a couple of questions, and then we're going to leave some room at the end for questions and answers from our lovely audience. Gaele, we're so glad to welcome you to Write and Shine. Our programme celebrates the first part of the day and tapping into the inspirational power of the morning. We love welcoming people who rise in the early hours naturally and those who peel themselves reluctantly out of bed to join us. I know it's the first part of the day here, but for you in Sydney it's the evening. It's around 6:30 in the evening, and I wondered if you could talk us through a typical day, about where you write, what time of day suits your writing. Tell us about a typical writing day.
And I also have a room where I write, which I'm in right now, so that helps me focus. I've got my books and my orchids, my plants, my orchids with their little snaky air roots going everywhere. And that really helps me.
Yeah, that's so nice to hear, Gaele. It sounds like a really, just a gentle approach. You've got a good space around you and just a sentence a day. I mean, I think that's ideal, just not putting too much pressure on yourself, but making sure there's some kind of connection with writing around you.
Yeah. Well, an ideal day would be 4 hours. But that's not always achievable.
Yeah. Do you have any other kind of writing rituals, things that you would do to like allow you to enter the creative space when you begin?
The usual one of cleaning everything up. That's if I kind of can't get into something, cleaning the house, cleaning my space. But I suppose one of the things that I do sometimes use is music. I've written poems with dark dub. I love playing that non-stop. Sometimes I'll play the same piece over and over and over again. Lucky, I often play it loud as well, so people may hear it. Like I really loved at one point Zipper Face by the pop group and Goth Trad. A friend died about 2 years ago now, and I played Ivry by Soundwalk Collective with Patti Smith. Okay. So that I played again over and over. Yeah. So that influences what I write as well. Like that Ivry was about Antoine Artaud. So he kind of floats in various ways through the work, not always positively, but yeah. Yeah, so I have that obsessive thing with music sometimes, not all the time.
That's interesting. I think that kind of connects to some of the things we're going to talk about today, this idea of creative uncertainty and how, you know, when you embark on a piece of work, you just have to trust that it will end somewhere interesting, or you just have to explore it. But maybe using music over and over again, it kind of gives you a grounding, it gives you that repetition, allows some predictability or a shape that enables you to kind of daydream through the writing.
Yeah, I think it might stimulate some kind of emotional space, and from that, surprising things that you didn't plan come out into your writing.
Yeah, the unexpected kind of love. That's great. I wonder if other people use music kind of as a way in, not just as background music, but as a way to kind of structure and tap into memories and other ideas. That's great. Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about music, I mean, it leads me to think about all the different genres and different influences in your writing. I know that you write short stories and poetry films, and you wrote a literary biography of the boxer Willie Carr. And I know currently you're really deeply exploring poetry. I find that fascinating. I love artists who are kind of moving in and out of different forms and shapes, because I do think you have to be open and nimble as storytellers. You have to be open to different ways of telling your stories, and then you can adapt your writing, your creative work to new experiences and situations. You don't get as stuck because you've got a toolkit of different types of writing or containers for your work. I wondered if you could just talk us through a couple of the projects you've worked on, and also why you've chosen to write in so many different formats and genres.
Yeah, I think when you came to Sydney, you were doing research for a Churchill Fellowship, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had completed the writing of the life story of Wally Carr, and he was a First Nations boxer. And that was the first full-length literary biography I had written, but the process wasn't new to me. A lot of the fictional and non-fictional writing I'd done up until then was based on archival research and oral interviews. I'd done a research project on Botswana women during the Second World War. My PhD on Black South African women writers was biobibliographic and involved interviews and sifting through archives in South Africa and Botswana. Some of the stories in the short story collection that I published with Heinemann were based on the same type of archival research and oral interviews. So in that way, it wasn't new to me. But I first met Wally at the Cauliflower Hotel in Waterloo in Sydney, and he was deeply upset that his story was being silenced by various means that people didn't know about him, that people didn't know what he'd achieved. And that became my main motivation for taking on the project. So I was pleased to have the opportunity to use my writing skills to assist in overcoming the various barriers, the silencing process that he was experiencing, and I suppose, groups of people experience in our society. And in doing that, it's society that benefits. People, as a society, growing as a society, we benefit in hearing and reading those kinds of stories that are, I suppose, suppressed. And I wanted to contribute to making that kind of change. I also worked very closely with Wally and his extended family, so it was a collaborative process, and that made it more comfortable. And that book, My Longest Round, was published by Magabala Books in 2019. So after that, I started writing poetry, and that really was a first for me, and it was uncomfortable, and it still is slightly uncomfortable. The first poem I wrote was prompted by a short video I took on my phone of a dead, partly decayed heron near the edge of a lake on the south coast of New South Wales. And it was really windy, and the bird's wing was moving up and down as if it was flying. That was kind of creepy, but somehow really moved me. And I was wondering, you know, about its death and that kind of thing. And the next poem was called Spectres, and that was about the millions of fish that were suddenly dying in the Darling River in Menindee, in the far west of New South Wales. And that was brought on by long-term mismanagement of the Murray-Darling Basin River system. So I was really moved to write about that. So writing poetry is very new to me and a bit scary, because it's just so precise. I think that's part of the reason. And I asked poet Andy Jackson to mentor me, and when he agreed, I applied, and I was successful in applying for an Australia Council disabled artist mentorship, and I was able to work, and I'm still working, but I worked with Andy for just over a year, and I'm going to continue. And his feedback has been really vital to my progress. He will also advise me on ordering those poems into a collection and help me with advice on how to find a publisher. And he's very gentle, he's very respectful, he's a very astute reader. He is an outstanding poet himself, I'd say one of Australia's best poets. I may be biased. He's a peer, and he's part of a community of disabled writers that I rely on. Mm-hmm.
Great.
So I'm not too sure where the desire to write poems came from. I really can't tell you that.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of just hear this kind of move for literary biography and the poetry, and I know shortly we're going to look at one of your poetry films as well. It feels like it's something quite instinctive, or something will your curiosity will draw you to something, and it feels like it would need to be that would need to be a biography, or that would need to be a poem, or this needs to be more visual. So is there something kind of instinctive that you're responding to?
I think it must be. If it's instinctive, it's a bit hard to define. But it may be my age. It may be that I want to do what I was born to do. Kind of, I don't want to hold back or be held back anymore. That may suit some things, some forms as opposed to others, and especially with poetry. Yes, I think so. I think you're right. Yeah, that it is more instinctive. It's drawing on an unarticulated knowledge and trusting that.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. and just thinking about how we follow our curiosity, why we might do things that are uncomfortable because we're drawn to it. I mean, the idea of you talking about poetry being something that is uncomfortable, there's discomfort in there. I mean, that's interesting just as a creative idea, that you're not choosing to go on the pathway that is easy or known. Actually, you're pursuing things that feel, make you possibly feel more vulnerable, or that you feel out of your comfort zone, because then you might end up with more interesting poetry.
I think so, and I think that's how we grow as artists, is to dive into that discomfort. There's also some comfort in it because you're doing what you really want to do rather than what you're kind of told you should do. So that's a bit of a luxury, and it's great to do that. And also with poetry, there's a shorter time between getting work published, so that's satisfying. Like, I've sent poems to literary journals, they've been published, and then I know that I'm on the right track somehow. That's great, not like waiting for a novel to be published.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's room to publish in various formats. So for example, when I was in Poland, and I met a young animator. Her animator name is Daria Oaks. And I really loved her work and asked her to animate one of my poems. That was I Was Born Misfit. And I got a fellowship based on that from the City of Sydney to animate 3 more poems, which are now completed. Dear Rosa, which we'll talk about later and probably show, is one of those. And now we're going to animate the fish poem that I mentioned. So that's great. I've also worked with musicians on those animations. I'm doing the soundtrack, and I've done some house soundtracks based on my poems. So I've worked a bit on virtual reality with the poems. So there's all that stuff to explore, which is really exciting.
Okay, so it just starts to open up new ways, new creative opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, let's. You mentioned Dear Rosa. Would you mind just introducing that short poetry film, and then I will play it to everybody.
Oh, okay. I'll just quickly say that I've also still writing short stories. Yeah, thanks to the Not Quite Right for Us anthology. So that was Speaking Volumes approached me, and I was really thrilled to be part of that initiative and be one of the 40 writers. So that's allowed me to continue on with that that's another project that I was able to do thanks to that opportunity. Now with the Dear Rosa, I wrote that poem after reading the Letters of Rosa Luxemburg. And I've always been horrified by the events that led to her murder and the way she was murdered by proto-fascists. Physically, she was such a small woman, a disabled woman. She had one leg shorter than the other. She limped. She was a thought leader, and you see that in the letters, defining the globalization of capital, and analyzing the logic of capital, building alternatives, and analyzing the building of alternatives to capitalism. So she was critical, she was skeptical, and she was critical of reformists and revolutionaries who fetishize hierarchical types of organization. She was an activist, but in her letters, she also talks about the last linden blossom. She talks about the shadows of oak trees, the color and scent of violets, like the clouds, half moon kind of swimming in the sky. There's all these lizards in the sunshine. There's swallows flying. She talks about the buffalo. She's in prison and she sees them pulling the carts, and she sees how brutally they're treated. So, she observes the world around her, and I think that's so important, and that's kind of included in this poem. the need to do that, the need to be part of the world around us.
Wow. Lovely. Well, let me share. I'm going to play, everybody, I'm going to play this gorgeous film, Dear Rosa. There we go.
To Rosa Luxemburg and the many other woman comrades who have fought and are fighting for a just world. Dear Rosa, their artillery feigns strength, my woman comrade, fallen. A bee hovers over your lips. Heartfelt pollen tumbles from its legs onto your skin, your eyelashes. With rapid insect wing beats, the tiny time traveler departs to the non-future, where dust soldiers hunger for chaos and lightless acacia pods grow, restless in sleep. My woman comrade, your scarlet finger, your slim ferocity, repulsed the frontiers of authoritarianism that pervade our broken forests. Dear Rosa, the armed struggle has left gaping holes in your throat. Laughter sags. Boots thump. Bird messages are scattered. And the whale-colored sky rains burned sweetbreads. Within this entire wasteland of existence, our answer to the artillery is heard, louder and louder through the damp dark. I was, I am, I shall be.
Wonderful. I love that so much, and I paused it on all those accolades at the end. I know it's done ever so well at various film festivals. It's such a beautiful piece, the kind of mix of your voice and the force of that animation and the subject. I love there was so much white space around it, the broken sounds, the broken soundtrack as well. And that final bit, our answer to the artillery is heard louder and louder through the damp dark. I was, I am, I shall be. Is that final part, that's from Rosa's letters, is it though?
That's from her letters, yes. That's why she'll be in prison.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting because it's, you know, it does show another theme in your writing, sort of this act of resistance. It's really strong in the film that we've seen, the poetry film, and across much of your work, this idea of resisting outward forces and kind of forging your own way forward. And I think that links to our theme about uncertainty as well, like having to find your own way, finding your own path. It feels like something that's been important to you through your writing life. Is that right?
Oh, it's been very important, yes, and now even more so. And I think we as human beings need to find new paths. That, okay, we have people and theorists and revolutionary actions that we can learn from and build upon, but we need to do a lot more than that and go beyond those things and figure out some totally new ways now. And that is important to me, yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of the role of partly the role of the artist and the writer, to kind of look for new ways of telling stories, new ways of shaping the world around us. Well, look,
Absolutely.
that leads me again just to get deeper into these kind of questions around writing, creativity, and uncertainty. Because uncertainty feels like so much of a part of creativity, so much of a part of life. If you're forging your own path, if you're, finding new ways of being, uncertainty is interlinked with it all. So in terms of creativity, when you have an idea and you start to pursue it, there's always obstacles and doubts rise up in your mind. I think we all will have experienced that as creatives. But as human beings, we desire control, don't we? We want predictability. It's safe, even though that's often an illusion, because the world is uncertain and the future is uncertain. I know so many artists do embrace uncertainty. I'm not sure I'm one of them. I'd like to be, but I know I read a quote recently from the Montreal-born writer Derja Chubose, who says she enjoys wading through her indecisiveness. When she can't find the words, she enjoys it, she says, because inarticulateness is the closest she gets to knowing herself and really hearing her voice. So I wondered if that resonated with you, the kind of a bit of enjoyment about uncertainty, or what role does uncertainty play in your creative work?
Yeah, there is an enjoyment there. It's like when you go into a city for the first time, you need to get lost to learn that city. I mean, I have pathways through Sydney, but the set routes that I go, but when I get lost, there's incredible enjoyment in discovery. In terms of uncertainty, how that has contributed to my creative work, it's been in various ways. But one of the uncertainties that I've had to deal with is a bit different than what we're talking about, because although I went to university and I did a PhD, I realized quite early on that I couldn't be an academic, that I don't think in a way that suits the academy. I'm not good at remembering and espousing facts. I don't remember book titles and dates, that kind of thing, very well. I don't remember jargon, or like Latin and Greek-based words, like the big words that are often used in academia. I'm not that great at spelling or grammar. I can never remember the style conventions for academic papers. So there's that kind of, I'd say I'm really not good at all that. And sometimes, like when I read essays or non-fiction books, I often need to look up words. I take notes, write in the margins, decipher the language. So it's almost as if those writers that I'm reading are using a code that stands in for like a great reservoir of assumed knowledge, and often it takes me ages to access that knowledge because I don't know the code or I don't remember it. So it takes me, I kind of come in and out of that kind of situation, and that's a definite uncertainty. And it could be about knowing the canon. I don't often I find that I don't actually know the canon and in a particular field, and that can be problematic. Like I unwittingly draw upon canons. I'm sure I'm influenced by them through a kind of osmosis, but I'm not well versed in the academic sense. And I never learnt creative writing. We chatted about that a little bit earlier. So I just wrote. And that doesn't mean I don't teach myself and asking Andy Jackson to mentor me. I'm learning, but not in the traditional way. So the work that I did at university was mainly based on listening to people talk, based on oral traditions, breath, rhythm, silences, body language, that kind of thing. And I find it easier, I think, to grasp concepts, feelings, emotions, more than rules and facts. So I've always written in that kind of space, and that means I face uncertainty all the time. I don't fit into dominant structures, and I never have. So yeah, that's part of the uncertainty, that I don't know what that's about. I don't know if other writers experience that. But I think that may be why I love writing poetry, because I can just let it flow from somewhere deep inside me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I don't research and you know, read around the subject that I'm writing about, but it's kind of a floating.
I mean, that sounds amazing, Gail. And thank you for kind of sharing that, you know, the insights and being honest about kind of where that uncertainty comes from, sort of uncertainty of place, and actually, you know, what that's meant for your creative work that's been outside of institutions and outside of dominant structures. I mean, that's so inspiring to hear. And, you know, who wants to be part of the club anyway? It's much more interesting to kind of be you know, forging your own way and kind of using, really trying to listen to yourself and see, you know, what the kind of writing voice wants to write, or what kind of work it wants to create. I wondered, so how I guess related to it, how important do you think is it for all of us to kind of embrace that discomfort, whether it's kind of working out where you fit into a place, or the discomfort of the kind of things that you're writing about? How important do you think it is to really embrace that discomfort?
Oh, I think it is important. I think not knowing is okay, and I think it's actually positive. It is uncomfortable, and maybe you don't want to be in that state all the time for your own mental health, but yeah, I think it is great to embrace it. I think it's kind of embracing humility. It's the humility of not knowing that informs good work. A critical curiosity, skepticism. I think that way you really get into a radical democratic approach to observing, to listening to what's going on around us. So yeah, I think embracing that discomfort is essential, not only to writing, but to salvaging some kind of habitable future on this planet, really, but finding a way forward in that way.
Yeah. And finding the way to tell the truth of life as we all see it, share our versions of things, because that can be so meaningful for other people. Putting our ideas out there so they won't be lost can in many ways help and support others, creating connection and community. Well, let's kind of explore that a bit more. I mean, I know, you know, we've talked and I've read about that. I know that when there were the bushfires that raged across the south coast of New South Wales in 2019, you were evacuated from your home. And so you have firsthand kind of experience of the disasters and the kind of climate crisis firsthand. And you've said that after you experienced that, you felt an absolute urgency to write. And I think for some people, an experience like that, or, you know, experiences in life make it harder to write, just because you've got the chaos of, you know, what comes afterwards, the practicalities, but also it's hard to face reality on the page. Sometimes it's really hard to face what you're seeing and what you're experiencing on the page. I wondered if you could say a bit more about that, about being kind of compelled to write when you see, you know, injustices, or, you know, like I say, the climate crisis on your doorstep out there.
Yeah, I understand that, you know, we all may be frustrated and angry by what we're seeing and scared. And for me, it may be my age, I don't know, but I really feel I want to dedicate the end part of my life to contesting what's happening now, and to contribute to salvaging some form of a decent future for us, for life on Earth. I don't know what motivates. I can't tell you that, what motivates me to write in these situations, but I'm more motivated than ever by injustice and by this incredible greed, fighting the greed, the drive for accumulation, the extraction that's going on, and fighting to change the way we produce, the way we think, the way we live, the way we eat, the way we grow things, the way we travel, all those things, the way we love.
Yeah. And I think that being, you wanted to change things and being compelled to write. I mean, I feel like that really comes across in a lot of your work, and that urgency, or that kind of, almost like tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, listen to what I've got to say. There is that that urgency, I think, that is really vivid in a lot of your writing. Which might be a good moment to invite you to read from the anthology. Kind of past, yeah, and maybe just the opening section, the first page would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You tell me if I'm going on too long, right?
Yeah, just do the first
me.
just the first page. I think it's great. Yeah.
Okay. The Apocrypha of O. Fine ash twists through O's locks, settles on her eyelashes, and mixes with the dewy perspiration on her skin to form a clay-like paste. She has stained her lips and eyelids purple with blackberry dye. A proud member of the coastal firefly squad, a warrior seed collector waging war against the extinction of species. Her boots still hold together, stitched and glued and resoled by old Dinkum, who used to be a cobbler such a very long time ago. She leans on a crutch of ornate wrought iron, crafted from the molten remains of the gates of the Watcher's compound where she now lives. Her chest rises and falls with the effort of traveling crookedly through the blackened husks of trees. She tightens her buttocks, holds, then releases, breathes out, flexes her pelvic floor muscles like she's sitting on a grape and lifting it slowly up her vagina. She lets go and treads soft as a smoky mouse, scampering across the ashen earth. Her eyes flit from hollows in the ground to burnt-out tree trunks, searching. She listens, disquieted by the absence of birdsong. No symphonies of frogs, no cicadas. Gravelly voices from her collection of books resonate in the quiet in her skull. The world shall be turned into the old silence, 7 days. No man shall remain. A ragged mouthful of the stench of rotting flesh turns her stomach. Behind a fallen tree, she finds scorched fur, a kangaroo, his arms curled in submission, burnt to bone. Maggots squirm thick from within his guts. O stumbles. Her left hand grabs hold of Eucalyptus globidea. The trunk stops her fall. Her heart beating against the stringing bark, its scorched hardwood intact, strong for now.
Beautiful. Oh, thanks so much, Gail. It'd be great to kind of hear a little bit about where that story came from. I mean, it's describing a life after many fires, and I know a lot of what you write is sort of set in the near future. Well, maybe it'd be good to hear just a little bit, like, where did that story come from?
Well, I mean, it definitely came from that experience of the bushfires on the south coast and being evacuated and just driving through the terrible desecration. I mean, even now, this was in 2009, New Year's Eve, 2019, 2002, so what am I saying? Yeah, 2019, 2020, that's right, yeah. And like, it was really scary and all the rest, but afterwards, it was just devastating to see the destruction, the immense destruction. At one point, we were filming after the fires for a project, and we were filming the burnt forest. And we were walking along, and then we looked down and we saw a little tortoise, and it was completely ash. It was an ash tortoise, and it's you could see the shape of its eyes, its little beak, its shell, the shape of its shell, everything was there, but in ash. And that kind of showed the absolute intensity and speed of those fires. And, you know, so much wildlife has been destroyed, and that's not counting insects and snails and all those smaller things. And even now, when you drive through the area, there are some forest areas that haven't recovered, the trees haven't recovered. So that's definitely the space that I'm writing about in this story. But I'm also writing about these concepts of adaptation and resilience and what they really mean, and what they'll mean for us if we're going to make change, which will be very different than the definitions we're given at the moment. Yeah, did you want to ask me anything else about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting just to kind of hear. Well, maybe say a little bit about that. What sort of definitions would you like to see, or where do you think the challenge is?
Yeah, about resilience. It's like, I suppose we need to think about what it is that actually makes us vulnerable and analyze that. For example, with disabled people, we're at least twice as likely to die or be injured than non-disabled people during a climate emergency. We're less likely to receive aid during that time, and we're less likely to recover in the long term after the disaster. And that's because our needs and access requirements are ignored. Mm-hmm. They're ignored in the planning process, in policy, in the majority of situations. And also in terms of the triage and emergency protocols in these situations, non-disabled people are seen as more worthy of life-saving treatments in many cases. So there's that kind of eugenics that informs a lot of the processes. And that makes us vulnerable. So when we're looking at resilience, we need to look at those things, not, I don't know, what they kind of place resilience at the moment as being an individual response, and it's far from that.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, and thinking about how, yeah, resilience and trying to shape a different response from others. Like, it takes a community to shift people's perceptions. So that kind of resilience and kind of rejection of the norms that you're talking about will only happen when people come together. You know, and part of that coming together is really like one of the roles of artists and writers, I really think, is like just being able to have a voice amongst it all. And the story that you shared and that you kindly read a section of, it's apocalyptic. I mean, it's saying that this is an extreme version of what could happen. This is where things could end up. So it's really, you know, inspiring and amazing to hear kind of a writer who will almost take where we are now to an extreme, or take it to a conclusion and offer it to the world for people to respond to. So that's part of, I think, what you're doing as a writer, just offering that, that resistance. I guess, you know, one question I'm interested in is sort of the practical side of kind of resilience. How do you look after yourself if you're writing about tough subjects, if you're living in this space of uncertainty? How do you, what do you do to look after yourself, or kind of keep going on the writing path?
Yeah, I think I don't think I am writing about future extremes. I think we are at the beginning of apocalypse, and we don't talk enough about that. We don't write enough about that. We don't shine the light on what's happening and analyze it, and we need to, and that's urgent. Now, in terms of looking after ourselves during these times, I think most governments and the state is not fulfilling that duty of care to us. I think self-care is really important, understanding when we need to rest, making sure I drink water, that kind of thing. grassroots mutual aid is really important. We need to forge sustainable links to community, our various communities, and build those. As writers, it also means that we need to create public performance platforms for ourselves and each other, our writing groups, the mutual aid groups, that kind of thing. I also think resilience, as writers, we have, I don't want to say duty, but it's urgent that we write the truth, that we kind of get out on every street corner in our neighborhoods, our towns, our factories, our shopping centers, and write and get the word, read our writing, perform our writing, find platforms for our writing. Yeah.
And have a voice amongst it all. Absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
Gaele, I want to talk to you all day, but I'm going to open it up for questions now. There's already some questions that have come in the Q&A box, but if you've got any thoughts or reflections, the chat box is open as well. So add in thoughts and reflections into the chat box, and any questions you can add to the Q&A. So I'm just having a look at some of the questions here. A few questions about poetry. Oh, Lisa Rainsford has asked, it's very firming to hear from you, a great example of activism as writers and how we can unsilence the silenced by giving voices to others' stories. Thanks, Lisa, for saying that. Ken Winners has said, have you always read a lot of poetry? Nice question. Has poetry always been a part of your life?
Yeah. Actually, no, I haven't in the past. Now I am. Now I'm reading a lot of poetry, and some of it I don't like. So I'm looking around for the type of poetry that I do like, and I'm reading that.
Yeah. Are there particular poets that you're drawn to at the moment? Any recommendations for us?
Oh, now I've got to think about that one. So I told you I'm hopeless at it.
Oh yeah, I did say that.
Well, obviously Andy's poetry, but I've said that already.
Oh yeah, what's Andy's name? What's his full name?
Andy Jackson.
Andy Jackson, that's someone to look up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I've got his latest book. He's just brought a book out. He's just published a book. Not sure if I've got it at hand.
Oh well, Andy Jackson.
Yeah, but you can look him up.
Yeah, we'll send around a link. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Nice to have these nice recommendations from our authors. Laura S has asked, do you schedule reading or other activities to train and nourish your writing life, or is it all spontaneous? Yeah, how organized is your writing life?
I'm not organized, no. But I do read. I don't read. I'm not as good at reading for as long as I used to. But I usually follow up. I also listen to Audible, so I can listen in the car as I'm doing long drives and that kind of thing. So that's really great. I feel like I'm really using that time to best advantage. Mm-hmm. And I order books, I read reviews. So I get books and read them because of that.
Lovely.
But no, I don't organize, I don't set time.
I feel like I would always like to do that. You always kind of want to have like an hour of writing or reading in the morning, but yeah, life doesn't always work that way, does it?
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Sarada's got a great question here. I don't know if you can see it as well, Gaele. Sarada says, don't worry, I'll read it. She says, thanks to Gaele for sharing her PhD experience. Could the academic community embrace the concepts of uncertainty and resilience as a way of interrogating their own structures of learning and allowing more autonomy for researchers, writers, and artists who exist at the intersection of disability, race, and social inequality?
Yeah, I think it's very hard within the institution, maybe going outside the institution and joining with, in solidarity with various activities that are happening in different countries outside the dominant sphere. Definitely, I think that should be done. And also maybe writing in easy English sometimes, putting things out so that a much wider group of people have access to it. And within those groups of people, there's intelligence, there's knowing that we really, as a society, need to draw upon if we're going to find solutions and new ways forward.
Yeah, it relates to what you've said previously, just about forming other communities or creating connections outside of the kind of dominant spheres.
Yeah.
Great. Got a couple more questions. Thanks everybody for all these questions coming through. Natasha Kalish has asked, she loved the film, Gail, and wanted to know if you work with that filmmaker often and how that collaboration came about. And I suppose that does relate to our idea of uncertainty, like working with other people brings a whole different kind of creative uncertainty. So yeah, how did that collaboration come about?
So I met Daria in Poland, and it was just by accident. It was at some art event, and she showed me her work, and I immediately was drawn to it and asked if we could work together, and then applied for funding, and that's how we started. But I also work with artists at Outlandish Arts, and we've spoken about uncertainty, but there's again an unarticulated knowing that when I see someone's work, I realize we've got the same vision, that's it, we can work together, and then go for it. And generally I allow those artists, not allow, but I work with those artists. I don't impose my views. I may set the parameters and give them a brief, but I know I can let them run with it. So I don't do anything. So with Daria, for example, she just runs with it. There's a process. We do a storyboard, but I have faith in her, and that's how it works.
Yeah. So kind of trust, you'd have to trust the other person and kind of allow them to take your work and explore it in their own way. So it is about uncertainty, but if there's trust, and it's kind of enjoyable, isn't it, to see what somebody else would do with your work, and it does can take you out of your expectations and your comfort zone as well.
Yeah.
Well, look, this leads me just to a final question. A few questions on a similar theme, but I'm just going to choose Edna's got a question about how much of your writing life goes towards film and music and other creative processes. So that might be a nice kind of question to end on, like the role that other art forms have on your work, Gail. We've kind of talked about it a bit today, but finding inspiration from film, music and other creative processes, how much of that finds a way into your work as well?
Well, at the moment it's a lot, but that opened up when I started writing poetry. So somehow for me the form of poetry really suited exploring all those different forms of collaboration and publication. There's one more thing that I forgot to say about resilience that I'd just like to add, and what we do as writers, and that's like the importance of, to use our skills, to have faith in them, that kind of thing, but that we create an aesthetic, and that's also important to make that pleasurable, polished, playful kind of work. And I think that assists us all to transform our various subjectivities and change our lives under capitalism, to help us find a path out of where we're at now. So I just wanted to quickly say the bit about the aesthetic of work as well.
Yeah, well, that's an even more perfect note to end on, Gail. Thank you so much. We've covered a huge amount of ground. I'm looking at the chat box as well, where people are just kind of so interested in all the things you've got to say, sharing your vulnerabilities, sharing the kind of role of resilience and thinking about uncertainty from a range of different angles. So it's just so interesting to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming along today, Gail. I'm going to give you a round of applause because I'm representing our little audience here. Thanks so much, Gail,
thank you, everyone,
for coming along. I'll just say before we go, we're celebrating this anthology, as you know, Not Quite Right for Us. I've seen in the chat box that Andy Williams actually has a poem in here as well. So what a great reason to get this wonderful anthology. It's in all good bookshops, Not Quite Right for Us, and it's published by Flipped Eye. I'm just going to put it in the chat box. It's such a dynamic mix of different writers and different voices. And I'll also just say, this is one of our Write and Shine early morning events. We run events all through the year, season by season, all in the early morning, depending on where you're living. And we've got a library of online courses as well. And I'm just going to share that with you as well. All I want to say right now is it's 8:30 in the morning where I am. The sun is coming out. It's evening for Gaele. And it's just so nice to make a connection through Zoom across the oceans. I've so enjoyed this morning's talk. And I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for coming along. Thank you especially to Gaele. And I hope everyone has a day filled with creative ideas and inspiration. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gaele.
And thank you, everybody.